Before we begin, let us know where you're listening from. After the story, rate it from 1 to 10. Now, let's start. It is a truth universally acknowledged that a single gentleman in possession of an impeccable waistcoat must be in want of a lady who can appreciate such finery. Or, perhaps more accurately, a lady who can appreciate the man beneath the waistcoat, regardless of how fine the garment may be. In the spring of 1814, when London was abuzz with celebration over Napoleon's exile to Elba and the ballrooms of Mayfair were positively teeming with eligible bachelors freshly returned from the continent, no gentleman's waistcoat was more admired than that of Lord Sebastian Huntington, the Earl of Thornfield. "He has returned from his grand tour with the most exquisite taste in fabric," whispered Lady Jersey to the Countess of Leuven at Almack's. "French silk, they say, though one shouldn't mention such origins in polite company these days." The ton, of course, found much to admire in Lord Huntington beyond his wardrobe. At 28, with a face that Michelangelo might have chiseled, shoulders broad enough to carry the weight of his considerable estate, and a fortune that made matchmaking mammas positively giddy, Sebastian was the catch of the season. The fact that he had thus far managed to evade matrimony only added to his mystique. "I would sooner wrestle a bear than subject myself to another season of husband-hunting débutantes," Sebastian remarked to his closest friend, Lord Pembroke, as they observed the crowded ballroom from a safe distance. "The way their mothers stalk about, one would think I were the last pheasant on a hunting expedition." Lord Pembroke chuckled. "You cannot blame them for their enthusiasm. You've been away for nearly 2 years. The pond of eligible bachelors has grown quite stagnant in your absence." "How flattering," Sebastian replied dryly. "To be compared to a breath of fresh air in a stagnant pond." Little did Lord Huntington know that across the ballroom, a pair of remarkably intelligent green eyes was observing him with interest, though not the sort of interest to which he had grown accustomed. Lady Aurelia Caldwell, the recently widowed Countess of Westmoreland, found herself quite unimpressed by the celebrated return of Lord Huntington. At 26, having endured a brief but thoroughly unsatisfying marriage to the elderly Earl of Westmoreland, God rest his cantankerous soul, Aurelia had developed a healthy skepticism toward handsome men who knew precisely how handsome they were. "He looks as though he expects the orchestra to pause whenever he speaks," Aurelia remarked to her younger sister, Beatrice. "I cannot abide a man who believes himself the center of everyone's attention." "Perhaps because you yourself have been the center of attention since your return to society," Beatrice observed with sisterly candor. "The wealthy, beautiful, young widow is as much a novelty this season as the returned Earl." "Nonsense," Aurelia protested, though she knew her sister spoke the truth. Her year of mourning had concluded just in time for the season, and though she had no intention of remarrying, certainly not so soon, she had found herself besieged by suitors drawn to her beauty, wit, and, she suspected most powerfully, the substantial fortune left to her by the late Earl. "Lady Westmoreland," came a smooth voice from behind her, "might I have the honor of the next dance?" Aurelia turned to find Lord Sebastian Huntington himself standing before her, one eyebrow arched in expectation of her immediate acquiescence. She noted, with some amusement, that his waistcoat was indeed a marvel, cream-colored silk embroidered with subtle gold threading that caught the light as he moved. "I'm afraid I'm engaged for the next set, Lord Huntington," she replied coolly, though no such engagement existed. His other eyebrow rose to join the first. "The one after, perhaps." "I believe I shall rest then. The evening grows warm." Something flickered in his blue eyes, surprise, perhaps, at being so casually dismissed. "Another time, then," he said with a slight bow before retreating. Beatrice gaped at her sister. "Aurelia! How could you refuse Lord Huntington? Half the ladies in this room would swoon to receive his attention." "Then let them have it," Aurelia replied. "I have no use for a man who expects women to fall at his feet simply because he possesses a handsome face and a well-cut coat." Dear reader, you might think our story ends here, with mutual disinterest and the promise of two souls destined never to meet in harmony. But fate, that clever matchmaker, had other plans for the proud Earl and the skeptical Countess. Their paths crossed again 3 nights later at Lady Pemberton's musicale, where Aurelia found herself seated directly behind Lord Huntington. From this vantage point, she could not help but notice how attentively he listened to the young lady at the pianoforte, his head tilted slightly as though genuinely moved by the music. When the performance concluded, his applause seemed sincere rather than perfunctory. "You appear surprised, Lady Westmoreland," he remarked, turning to catch her observation. "I am," she admitted. "I would not have expected you to appreciate Mozart with such evident feeling." "Because a man concerned with his appearance must necessarily be shallow in his appreciations," he countered, his eyes twinkling with amusement rather than offense. Aurelia felt a flicker of shame at having judged him so quickly. "Perhaps I spoke hastily." "Perhaps," he agreed. "Though you are not entirely wrong. I do take particular care with my appearance. My late father always said that a gentleman's attire reflects the order of his mind and the discipline of his character." Something in his tone, or a hint of reverence when speaking of his father, softened Aurelia's prejudice slightly. "A wise philosophy. And what of you, Lady Westmoreland? What philosophies guide your choices?" The question was unexpected, thoughtful in a way that disarmed her. "I believe in seeing people as they truly are, not as society would have them appear." "A challenging proposition in our world," he observed. "The tongue thrives on appearances." "Which is precisely why I find it so tedious," she replied. Sebastian laughed, a genuine sound that drew glances from nearby listeners. "We find ourselves in agreement, then. How unexpected." Their conversation might have continued, but Lady Pemberton chose that moment to announce the next performer, and propriety demanded their attention turn elsewhere. Yet Aurelia found her thoughts returning to their exchange throughout the evening, puzzling over the glimpse of depth she had detected beneath Lord Huntington's polished exterior. The following week brought the most anticipated event of the early season, the Duchess of Richmond's grand ball. The ballroom was a vision of crystal and candlelight, with London's finest dressed in their most splendid attire. Aurelia, resplendent in a gown of deep emerald silk that heightened the color of her eyes, found herself approached by a succession of gentlemen requesting dances. From across the room, Sebastian watched the Countess of Westmoreland with growing curiosity. Unlike most young widows of his acquaintance, she showed no eagerness to secure a new husband. She danced selectively, conversed intelligently, and displayed a refreshing lack of artifice in her interactions. When she laughed, it appeared she did so because something genuinely amused her, not because laughter was expected. "You're staring, Huntington," observed Lord Pembroke, appearing at his side with 2 glasses of champagne. "Quite fixedly, I might add." Sebastian accepted the offered glass. "Lady Westmoreland is not what I expected." "Ah, the lovely Countess. They say her marriage to old Westmoreland was arranged by her father to cover his gambling debts. Barely lasted a year before the old man succumbed to gout. Left her everything, though. Quite the scandal in certain circles." Sebastian frowned. "I had not heard this." "Well, it's not the sort of thing discussed in polite company," Pembroke replied with a shrug. "But it does explain her independence. A young woman who has already fulfilled her duty to family might be reluctant to surrender her newfound freedom." Sebastian's gaze returned to Aurelia, seeing her now in a different light. Not as a haughty beauty too proud to accept his attention, but as a woman who had already sacrificed for duty and now guarded her liberty carefully. It was at the supper interval that fate engineered their most significant encounter yet. Aurelia, seeking a moment's respite from the crowded ballroom, stepped onto a small balcony overlooking the garden. The night air was cool and sweet with the scent of spring blooms. Escaping the madness, came a now familiar voice. Aurelia turned to find Sebastian joining her on the balcony, 2 glasses of wine in hand. He offered one to her with a smile that seemed less practiced than his usual polished expression. "Thank you," she said, accepting the glass. And yes, one can only engage in the same conversation about the weather and the upcoming royal garden party so many times before requiring fresh air. "I've counted 17 distinct mentions of the possibility of rain on Tuesday," Sebastian replied. "And no fewer than 23 speculations about which plume the Princess of Wales might wear in her turban." Aurelia laughed despite herself. "You've been counting." "It keeps me from expiring of boredom," he admitted. "Though I've found the evening considerably improved since making your acquaintance, Lady Westmoreland." "Flattery, Lord Huntington." "Honesty," he corrected. A rare commodity in these circles, as I'm sure you've observed. They stood in companionable silence for a moment, sipping their wine and gazing at the garden below, where lanterns illuminated winding paths between carefully tended flower beds. "I owe you an apology," Aurelia said at last. "I judged you rather harshly upon our first meeting." "Based solely on my waistcoat, I presume," he teased. Among other superficial observations, she acknowledged with a small smile. "It was unfair of me." "We are all guilty of hasty judgments," Sebastian replied magnanimously. "I, for instance, mistook your disinterest for haughtiness, when perhaps it was merely discernment." Aurelia studied him, noting the genuine warmth in his eyes. "Your waistcoat tonight is particularly fine," she observed, changing the subject. "The blue brings out your eyes." "Now who's being superficial?" he countered with a laugh. Their banter continued as they returned to the ballroom, where Aurelia found herself, somewhat to her surprise, accepting Sebastian's invitation to dance. As they moved through the figures of the quadrille, she discovered him to be a skillful partner who matched her steps with easy grace. "You dance well for a man so concerned with his waistcoats," she remarked as they came together in the pattern. "A gentleman must excel in all areas of social accomplishment," he replied with mock solemnity. "Dancing, conversation, and yes, the selection of fine garments." "And in which area do you consider yourself most accomplished, Lord Huntington?" His eyes held hers as they circled each other. "That, Lady Westmoreland, remains for you to discover." The dance ended all too soon, and Aurelia found herself reluctantly relinquishing Sebastian's company to the demands of propriety and her previous engagements. Yet throughout the remainder of the evening, she was acutely aware of his presence in the room, and more than once caught his gaze following her movements. Over the next fortnight, London society could not help but notice the increasing frequency with which Lord Huntington and Lady Westmoreland appeared in each other's company. They were observed in animated conversation at Lady Melbourne's literary evening, rode together in the park on 2 consecutive mornings, properly chaperoned by Aurelia's companion, of course, and stood suspiciously close during an exhibition of classical sculptures at the Royal Academy. "Mark my words," Lady Jersey pronounced to her eager listeners at Almack's, "we shall be hearing an announcement before the season's end." "But can it be a love match?" wondered young Lady Amelia Swift. "They seem so different, he so fashionable and social, she so independent and serious." "My dear girl," Lady Jersey replied with the wisdom of years spent observing the romantic entanglements of the ton, "it is precisely those differences that often spark the most passionate attachments." Indeed, something was sparking between the Earl and the Countess, though neither would have yet called it love. Aurelia found herself increasingly drawn to Sebastian's unexpected depths, his knowledge of literature, his dry observations about society's absurdities, his surprising tenderness when speaking of his younger sisters. Sebastian, in turn, discovered in Aurelia a sharp intellect and refreshing honesty that made other ladies' practiced flirtation seem hollow by comparison. Their growing connection faced its first serious test at the Marquis of Stafford's dinner party, where they found themselves seated at opposite ends of the long table. Sebastian was placed beside the notoriously flirtatious Lady Caroline Denton, who made no secret of her interest in the eligible Earl. From her distant position, Aurelia could observe Lady Caroline's attentions, the lingering touches on Sebastian's arm, the exaggerated laughter at his remarks, the coquettish glances from beneath lowered lashes. Though she told herself it was of no consequence to her whom Lord Huntington chose to charm, Aurelia felt an unfamiliar twist of something uncomfortably like jealousy in her chest. "The burgundy is exceptional tonight, is it not, Lady Westmoreland?" inquired her dinner partner, Lord Harrington, a pleasant if somewhat dull gentleman of middle years. "Indeed," Aurelia replied absently, her attention still fixed on the tableau at the far end of the table, where Lady Caroline was now whispering something in Sebastian's ear. What happened next occurred with such swiftness that onlookers would later debate whether it had been accident or design. As the footman served the main course, Aurelia rose slightly from her seat, reaching for her wine glass. In doing so, she somehow, and opinions varied as to the mechanics of the incident, managed to knock over not only her own glass but also that of her neighbor, sending a wave of dark burgundy cascading across the table. The resulting commotion drew all eyes, including Sebastian's, as footmen rushed to contain the spill. In the confusion, Aurelia slipped away from the table, murmuring apologies and claiming a need for fresh air. She retreated to a small library adjacent to the dining room, her cheeks burning with mortification. What had come over her? Such clumsiness was entirely unlike her, and yet the sight of Sebastian receiving Lady Caroline's attentions had provoked a reaction she could scarcely comprehend. "Are you well, Lady Westmoreland?" She turned to find Sebastian himself standing in the doorway, concern evident in his expression. More alarming still was the large burgundy stain spreading across his previously immaculate cream waistcoat. "Your waistcoat!" she exclaimed in horror. "I am so terribly sorry. I cannot imagine how I could have been so careless." Sebastian glanced down at the ruined garment and, to Aurelia's astonishment, began to laugh. Not a polite chuckle of forced amusement, but genuine, unrestrained laughter that transformed his handsome features into something even more appealing. "It is only fabric," he said when his mirth subsided. "Easily replaced." "But it's ruined," Aurelia persisted, stepping closer to examine the damage. "And it looked to be quite fine." "It was my favorite," Sebastian admitted, still smiling. "But I find I cannot regret its sacrifice if it has brought me a moment alone with you." Aurelia looked up sharply, suddenly aware of their proximity and the intensity in his gaze. "You cannot mean that. Lady Caroline was clearly captivating your attention." "Lady Caroline," Sebastian replied deliberately, "could spill an ocean of wine on every waistcoat I own, and I would not cross a room to speak with her. Yet here I am, having abandoned my dinner to ensure your well-being after what was clearly—" He paused, his eyes twinkling, "a calculated assault on my wardrobe." Aurelia's eyes widened. "You cannot think I did it deliberately." "Did you not?" he challenged softly. The directness of his question and the knowing look in his eyes made denial impossible. Aurelia felt her heart begin to race as she realized he had seen through her impulsive action to the emotion that had prompted it. "Perhaps," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper, "I found myself unexpectedly displeased by Lady Caroline's attentions to you." Sebastian's smile deepened, and he took her hand in his. "Lady Westmoreland, Aurelia, you need never resort to wine-throwing to gain my attention. It has been yours, completely and utterly, since the moment you first disdained to dance with me." "That makes very little sense," she replied, though her fingers curled willingly around his. "Love rarely does," Sebastian said simply. The word hung between them, momentous and transformative. Aurelia felt her heart flutter in a most alarming and delightful manner as Sebastian slowly, deliberately, raised her hand to his lips. "We should return to dinner," she said weakly, though making no move to withdraw her hand. "Yes," he agreed, equally motionless. "Though I fear my appearance will cause quite the scandal. The ton will be abuzz with speculation about how the impeccable Lord Huntington came to wear his wine rather than drink it." "Let them talk," Aurelia said with newfound boldness. "I find I care less and less for the opinions of society." "Another area in which we find ourselves in perfect agreement," Sebastian replied, offering his arm. "Shall we face the gossips together, then?" As they returned to the dining room, the assembled company could not help but notice two significant developments: the prominent stain adorning Lord Huntington's previously immaculate waistcoat, and the unmistakable look of tender affection that passed between him and Lady Westmoreland as he seated her at the table. By the following morning, the incident was being recounted in drawing rooms across Mayfair, with each retelling growing more elaborate than the last. By afternoon, it was widely accepted as fact that the Countess had deliberately doused the Earl with wine in a fit of jealous passion, and that he, instead of taking offense, had declared his undying devotion on the spot. "The stories grow more ridiculous by the hour," Sebastian remarked to Aurelia as they strolled through Hyde Park 2 days later, her sister Beatrice following at a discreet distance. "Lady Melbourne's cook's assistant apparently told her lady's maid that you threw an entire tureen of soup at my chest." Aurelia laughed. "How wasteful of me. At least wine has some dramatic flair." "Indeed," Sebastian agreed. "And speaking of flair, I have something for you." He reached into his coat and withdrew a small package wrapped in silver paper. "What is this?" Aurelia asked, accepting the gift with curious fingers. "Open it and discover." Inside, nestled on a bed of velvet, lay a small golden brooch in the shape of a wine glass, tiny rubies forming drops that appeared to spill from its rim. "Sebastian!" Aurelia exclaimed, forgetting propriety in her surprise. "You cannot be serious." "I had it commissioned the very next morning," he replied, clearly delighted by her reaction. "I thought it only fitting to commemorate the moment that changed everything between us." "It's ridiculous," she said, even as her fingers traced the delicate craftsmanship. "As ridiculous as a countess deliberately spilling wine to claim a gentleman's attention," he countered with a raised eyebrow. "I shall never live it down, shall I?" "Not if I have any say in the matter," Sebastian confirmed. "I intend to remind you of it at every opportunity for as long as you'll allow me to remain in your company." The meaningful pause in his words was not lost on Aurelia. They had known each other but a few weeks, yet in that short time, something profound had developed between them, something that made the heart flutter and the future seem suddenly, brilliantly clear. "And how long might that be?" she asked softly. Sebastian stopped walking and turned to face her, heedless of the curious glances from other parkgoers. "If I answer truthfully, I fear you might think me too impetuous." "I have already revealed myself to be capable of impetuous action," Aurelia reminded him. "I believe I can tolerate it in others." Taking a deep breath, Sebastian took both her hands in his. "Lady Westmoreland, Aurelia, I know our acquaintance has been brief, but I have never been more certain of anything than I am of my feelings for you. Your intelligence, your honesty, your spirit, even your willingness to sacrifice fine Burgundy in a moment of jealousy, all have captured my heart completely." Aurelia felt that now familiar flutter in her chest intensify as she recognized the direction of his words. "When I returned to England, I had no intention of finding a wife this season, or perhaps ever," Sebastian continued. "I believed myself content with my independence. But then I met a woman who challenged my every preconception, who saw beyond appearances to the person beneath, who made me laugh and think and feel as no one ever has before." He sank gracefully to one knee, still holding her hands, oblivious to the gasps and whispers erupting around them. "Aurelia Caldwell, Countess of Westmoreland, would you do me the very great honor of becoming my wife? I promise to provide an endless supply of fine waistcoats for you to ruin whenever you feel the need to claim my attention." For once in her life, Aurelia found herself speechless, overwhelmed by the sincerity and affection in Sebastian's eyes. When she finally found her voice, it held none of her usual composure. "Yes," she said simply, her smile radiant. "Yes, I will marry you, Sebastian Huntington, though I cannot promise not to ruin more of your waistcoats if the occasion demands it." Sebastian rose and, propriety be damned, pulled her into a brief but fervent embrace before remembering their public setting. As they turned to share their news with the wide-eyed Beatrice, they became aware of the crowd of onlookers who had witnessed the romantic scene. "I believe we have just provided the ton with gossip to last the remainder of the season," Sebastian murmured. "Let them talk," Aurelia replied, her hand secure in his. "For once, the truth is far more interesting than anything they might invent." Their wedding, held 6 weeks later at St. George's, Hanover Square, was the social event of the season. Society matrons dabbed at their eyes as vows were exchanged, while younger ladies sighed over the romance of it all, a love born of spilled wine and ruined waistcoats. Lady Jersey, ever the authority on matters of the ton, was overheard remarking to the Countess of Leuven as they departed the church, "I said from the first there was something between them. When a gentleman values a lady's company above the state of his waistcoat, you may be certain it is love of the most enduring kind." And so it proved to be. In the years that followed, the Earl and Countess of Thornfield became known not only for their enviable marriage but also for their shared wit, intelligence, and the curious habit of exchanging wineglass-shaped trinkets on each anniversary. As for the infamous waistcoat that started it all, Sebastian had it framed and hung in his dressing room at Thornfield Park, a reminder that sometimes the most perfect love stories begin with imperfect moments, and that a ruined garment is a small price to pay for a lifetime of happiness. Dear reader, is that not the most delicious scandal to end our tale? A public proposal in Hyde Park, all because a clever countess knew precisely how to capture the attention of the man she desired. Let it be a lesson to us all, sometimes the path to true love requires a splash of courage, a dash of impropriety, And perhaps, just perhaps, a very good Burgundy.